Hi, everyone. I'm Matthew DeSantis.
Hey, everybody. I'm Acacia Clement.
And welcome to another episode of Snowbirds on NYRA Bets. I hope everybody is doing well this lovely weekend to start things off in March. I'm joined by my wonderful colleague here at NYRA, Acacia Clement, who is down in Tampa. And listen, we had a little bit of a fake spring. I'll be honest. This here in New York, it was like in the 50s. People were out on the beach. I mean, I'm right here by Rockaway Beach, so it's kind of nice. And then this morning I woke up and they said, you know something, let's give them 30-degree temperatures and chill. And so we're right back to this. But how are things going with you down in Florida, Acacia?
Good. All well. Looks like it's going to be a great weekend. Obviously, jam-packed on Saturday for Tampa Bay Derby Day. It's really the biggest day of their winter season. We really kind of laid the foundation with the St. F. Davis last month. And then every year that I've been able to do the Tampa Bay Derby, it's such a joy because it's big day, little track that really it's full of excitement, that kind of environment that's just so full as Pippin makes his appearance. Starting. He's early today.
He is.
It's such a great environment for their big day. And the racing came up really, really good too. So really looking forward to the weekend.
Absolutely. No, it's going to be great. So we're going to dive into the 5 stakes races taking place on Saturday at Tampa Bay, highlighted, of course, by that Tampa Bay Derby, which is a 50-point Kentucky Derby prep race. Before we get to that, I want to remind everybody to press that like button and subscribe here on NYRA Bets YouTube today. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos like race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, and so much more drop on the channel. So press the like and subscribe button today. Well, Acacia and now Pippin, I'm glad that you guys are joining so we can talk about this. And you're right, it's going to be a fun day at Tampa Bay Downs. It is one of their big days. The racing did come up strong. And one of the things that I really noticed was, oh, this is where all the Chad Brown horses have been. That all of a sudden it feels like Chad is kind of unleashing this kind of 2025 cohort on us after what's been a little bit of a slow start for him. A little bit at the championship meet, even up here at Aqueduct. And it's like all of a sudden you see a lot of familiar names that you remember from last year kind of coming back. But Graham Motion's got some interesting horses. Christoph's got some nice horses in the sequence as well. So it should be a lot of fun and a great combination of turf and dirt as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, on the Chad Brown note and some of the other big barns that you mentioned, I think it's just kind of a typical old school training mentality, training schedule that a lot of the top horses get the winter off. So after the Breeders' Cup, after some of those big stakes in November that we have, the end of turf racing, a lot of those horses will go to the farm or, just be put on the shelf. Be kind to them, give them the winter off, and get them ready for a big campaign starting the year, because otherwise they're racing the whole year, and just mentally and physically it really does wonders. And especially with the turf horses, to give them the winter off, it makes a lot of sense. And on the behalf of Chad, he really doesn't run much the last couple of years at Gulfstream anyway, especially on the turf. So we've seen the better turf horses coming back at Tampa to start off their year. We saw it last month with Saffron Moon breaking the track record. She'll be back obviously tomorrow as well. And even just in previous years. But now we're seeing him do it with his dirt horses as well. Of course, thinking of Chancer McPatrick in the Tampa Bay Derby. So it's from Payson Park, where he's based, where Christoph's based, where Skippylongstocking based. It's about an hour and a half to Gulfstream, 3 hours to Tampa. So you have some options with the 2 tracks from that training facility.
It's great insight and wonderful to have people understand that. And yeah, it is great to see these horses get a little time off, come back fresh, come back rejuvenated for an exciting campaign. And obviously a lot of these horses we're going to be excited to see this summer up at Saratoga as well. So going to be great. And let's dive into this sequence and talk about, let's start things off actually on the dirt with the Challenger Stakes, grade 3 going 1 mile and a 16th. This is a field of 8. And of course, the 2 names that really pop out, I think, are Skippylongstocking on the far outside, and certainly Brad Cox's Most Wanted, who lost last time out to Rattle and Roll, who of course we saw go overseas into the Saudi Peninsula and win over there before coming in 5th, I believe, in that Saudi Cup. So, lost to a very, a horse that in Rattle and Roll, that horse's form goes up and down sometimes, but when he's running well, he's running really well. And so, other than that, Most Wanted hasn't done anything wrong. And quite frankly, over the years, this is the type of race Skippylongstocking has cashed a lot of checks winning. these kind of grade 3 races. Tampa Bay Downs, he's 2 for 2 here. He's won this race before. Interesting in whether you have a preference between those top 2 or maybe where else you might be looking in this field in terms of maybe Patriot Spieler or a horse like Ben Duke.
Yeah, I think it's, it's funny, like you said, this is kind of Skippylongstocking's type of race. He's shown all along that he's just maybe not quite up to the level of those grade 1 horses. But it's interesting.
Yep.
Skippylongstocking's actually looking for his 3rd straight win in the Challenger. So this has been a race that he's been very effective in. But he won the Challenger last year off of being eased in the Pegasus World Cup.
Right.
He had said that day that he had really struggled with the heat. Came back, won the Challenger, then won the Oaklawn Handicap, and had a pretty solid year. However, this year he's actually coming in I think, better form overall. He finished 3rd running on in the Pegasus World Cup behind White Abario, and he was just a neck away from Locked, who we saw go out and win at Santa Anita with a huge figure as well. So he's coming in, I think, actually in better form this year than he did last year, and even probably the year prior to that as well. So he's 2 for 2 in Tampa. Both of those wins have been in this race, so he's looking to keep it 3 for 3. And I get it. Why change what's been working for this horse? Most Wanted is certainly interesting. He is the half brother to Life is Good as well. So he's bred to kind of be that from a mile to a mile and an eighth type of horse. So this really seems to hit him right between the eyes as well. And he's done nothing wrong. He finished 2nd in the Clark behind Rattle and Roll, as you mentioned. And I know he won the Oklahoma Derby. So the Clark was really kind of that race that he needed to show some validity and that he could hang. And so if he's ready off the layoff too, he is a huge player. I've always loved Ben Duke. He's such a handsome horse. He's just not a winning type, you kind of want him to get the job done against a horse like Law Professor last time.
Yeah.
So I think it's between those 3, but it makes for a really fun and interesting race between those.
Yeah, it certainly does. And it is interesting. You also saw, you spoke about, Skippy just losing to Locked that last time out in the Pegasus World Cup, and we saw what Locked came back to do. You could say the same thing about Most Wanted, actually beating a horse like Hit Show, who we've then come back to see run so well in so many other races, actually finished 3rd in that big cap out at Santa Anita as well. And it's interesting. Hit Show to me is giving like future Skippylongstocking vibes, like just a really good horse that's like grade 2, grade 3 winner, and like not quite there at the grade 1 level yet, but like can maybe hit 3rd and things like that. So, but as I always say on the show, like you need horses like that. Like we need more of these types that like are really good grade 2 and grade 3 horses, because they ultimately help replenish this older handicap division. And I think that's one of the things we're so excited to see, with really a lot of names coming back this year in that older division. So
totally.
Good things. And it should be a good race.
Yeah. It's cool to see him back as a 6-year-old and still running at, this level.
Absolutely. So going to be a fun one there in the Challenger, but let's hit the turf and go to the Columbia Stakes. And we have a really interesting field here. I mentioned, we talked at the top about Chad Brown having a lot of horses coming back. We see a horse like Zulu Kingdom coming back in this race. Obviously, you have an early adopter as well. Cherie DeVoe's got Reagan's Wit. Christoph has Revolutionaire making a first start in North America. And Acacia, I'm just curious, because you spent a lot of time around Christoph's barn. I'm really interested in, certain horses come over from Europe and they might need a start or two to kind of get things going. Others seem to be able to come right over and adjust very quickly. And I'm just curious, kind of, is there a trick to that, or is it just kind of a horse-by-horse situation, as this one has run well over a variety of different goings over in France? And so you've seen this horse run well over a firm turf course, but you've also seen this horse run well over softer ground, which is more common in a place like France.
Yeah, absolutely. And, sometimes you'll see horses purchased like this horse from Europe to come to America because they would do better on a firmer turf course. Looking at this partnership, West Point and Heather Winters, they teamed up a few years ago, buying a horse from France, from Europe as well, in Atomic Blonde, who was one of those who she was kind of like right there. She won a stake at Churchill, but she was right there competitive in every single graded stake race that she ran in, which was, those are the kinds of horses that you look for, kind of like a Skippylongstocking that we talked about, that's just consistent and always shows
Yeah.
up. He's always competitive. So it seems like Revolutionaire could be that kind of type as well. Christoph and West Point have had plenty of success purchasing horses from Europe and bringing them here. There is always the question as to how they're going to take to their first U.S. race. There is always, is it a horse that's going to be able to break into the race well because it's a different type of running style? However, with this guy, he's been sprinting over in Europe. So I do think that the mile actually should help him to be able to get into the race a little bit more. He's a beautiful gray colt. He's a lovely mover too, having seen him at Payson. So really excited to get a chance to see him racing. But yeah, there is always the question. I mean, it's always a little bit of a layoff as well. And, Christoph and Miguel are really more about, like we talked about, setting a horse up for the whole season, not just point into the race. This is not end game for a horse like Revolutionaire. You want him to run in all of these turf stakes in New York throughout the rest of the year. So I'm really excited to see him. I think he's very talented, but yes, there is always the question, especially with some of the horses that he's going to be facing, like some of the ones that you mentioned, of course, the Chad Brown duo and Cherie's horse.
Now, in that regard, Chad Brown's horse, Zulu Kingdom in particular, coming back from that 2-year-old campaign where we saw him win the With Anticipation and really look pretty good. But if you just look at buyer speed figures, they didn't pop off the page necessarily, didn't run huge numbers. And that's always, I think, the big question mark is from 2 to 3, how much maturation is there? How much does a horse continue to develop? Do they get faster? And to some extent, I'm interested whether or not a horse like Dream On or Reagan's Wit. Now, these are 2 horses that had Lasix last time, but they also got a start in for 2025. So maybe they're a little bit more fresh. They knocked the rust off, in particular with Reagan's Wit. I mean, you talk about a horse with a turn of foot, went from last to first in kind of no time at all for Cherie. And so it is interesting, like you said, these first races of the year on the turf in some instances, this is not the end goal, but sometimes you do want to look at these horses who maybe have a race in them because they might just be a little bit more fit, a little bit more cranked up, a little bit more ready.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I thought Reagan's Wit was really impressive last time out when winning, and the second place finisher did come back to win in his subsequent start. The authentics that I have been around and have seen are big, tall, leggy individuals. So ones that you would think would be better as 3-year-olds as well. They're not early, fast, precocious types at all. So I'm wondering if that could have something to do with it. Obviously, he's run at Ellis and Fairgrounds. I haven't seen this horse before, so I'm looking forward to seeing how he stacks up from a physical perspective. But I'm wondering if that could play into it, the fact that he just needed some time, come back as a 3-year-old. I thought it was a really impressive win, the way that he did it when breaking his maiden. But then obviously it is a little bit of a jump into stakes company just based off the back of a maiden win. Now, as far as Zulu Kingdom is concerned, he's one of those horses that made his U.S. debut a winning one. And I remember interviewing Chad before the With Anticipation, which he won as a 2-year-old. And he said, I think he's talented, but I don't know really what we're going to get from him at first asking, because he's a bit of a distracted, curious horse. He lacks focus. And he still was able to win, but you could kind of see it in both the With Anticipation and the Pilgrim that he was waiting on horses a little bit. And then Fabian lost his crop in the Breeders' Cup. So that's the maturation that I'm wondering we're going to see more so than even from a physical jump, which you want to see too. But it's that focus that I would expect we're going to see more with him coming back as a 3-year-old.
That's a great point, and it's something I noticed in both of those races that he won up here in New York. And you're absolutely right about the focus, and he does look around kind of for everybody else. And then, he just, once he sees somebody he wants to run against, then he kind of re-engages and keeps going. But by the way, Chad Brown's comments about Zulu Kingdom sounded a lot like my 3rd grade teacher's comments about me. Like, easily distracted, loses focus. It's just like a curious horse, a curious child. But yes, I mean, listen, we all develop, and so the horses develop in their own ways as well. I mean, it's interesting. I know Todd mentioned this last week, actually, after the Fountain of Youth, that River Thames kind of started looking at the screen in the infield, down the stretch. And you could watch, if you watch the replay, his left ear just starts flicking and kind of looking over that direction. So, these horses, when they're young and they're still developing, these sorts of things happen. But like you said, Chad's had this horse now, training this horse all winter and come back as a 3-year-old, maybe a little bit more mature, a little bit more focused. So should be a really good one, though, in the Columbia Stakes. And let's head to this kind of 3-race sequence here, all graded stakes races, the Hillsborough, the Florida Oaks, and the Tampa Bay Derby. The Hillsborough, a field of 10. And listen, I love me some South African horses coming over. And so give me another for Graham Motion, 5-2 on the morning line. Your second choice to your favorite, Saffron Moon, who you mentioned earlier for Chad Brown. But Graham bringing another South African horse over. We've seen Todd Pletcher have a couple South African horses as well. This one is undefeated, a perfect 7-for-7 over there. Coming over here, it should be a lot of fun. I'm just always a fan of this kind of international racing and having these horses coming over. So should be a lot of fun. But again, this feels like to some extent, the Graham Motion and Chad Brown show, with a lot of their horses coming back. A horse like Sparkle Blue, who, again, always kind of a hard runner and always a try hard type of a horse at 8-1. But certainly the combination of Saffron Moon and Spaladay in particular, really impressive horses.
Yeah, Sparkle Blue, who actually won this race last year in the Hillsborough. I think it is a tougher group this year from top to bottom. I know she beat Fluffy Socks last year in the Hillsborough at Tampa, but I would say just from a full field, this is a more competitive group that she's going to have to face here for Sparkle Blue. And it does seem like Give Me Another is kind of the one that's going to be taking more attention of Graham's too. I'm excited to see her. She came from the Mike DeCock barn, who I just have so much respect for. My husband Miguel actually worked for him after he finished the Flying Start program. And he always says that he's just a brilliant trainer. He thinks outside the box. He does kind of miracles with horses, and he's brought a lot of those teachings back to America because it's not really what we would see. So I'm sure this is a mare that's coming in great form. And obviously she's 7-for-7. He's really done nothing wrong with her. So yes, there is, like we talked about with the European horses. And then, now it's the new thing that you can import horses from South Africa, but it is still quite a lengthy journey for them to get over, a lengthy quarantine. There's a lot of steps for them to get to America. She's had plenty of time to be training at Palmettos, though, in preparation for this race. I'm certain she's fit, but I'm excited to see her. I think Saffron Moon was dazzling in the Endeavor last time out. She, as we mentioned, broke the track record that day, and that was off of a layoff. And I thought, talking about that maturation, yes, the biggest jump is probably 2-3. I think you see a big one from 3-4. And then actually something that Christoph has really taught me to look for. He said, I think you see an even bigger one from 4-5 if they stay around. And something, Maggie Wolfendale talks about a lot. 5 is the age at which horses actually reach their peak physical maturity. And a lot of thoroughbreds really don't stay around on the racetrack until they're 5. Saffron Moon definitely benefited from staying in racing because she took a huge jump forward, and she's now a 6-year-old as well. So, you kind of watch it year by year as they progress, and she's one of those that maybe just needed some time.
And Chad's been incredibly patient with her too. I mean, this is a horse that only had 1 start in all of 2024, 3 starts in 2023. So clearly this is a horse that he always believed was incredibly talented to kind of keep her around. And now as a 6-year-old, like you said, coming off a track record victory in that Endeavor. So, she loves the turf course at Tampa, and Flavian Pratt up on the mount for that one. Flavian just winning 42% of his mounts at Tampa Bay this meet. So, no big deal there. Exactly. Just no problem. But yeah, this is a pretty star-studded race in terms of some horses coming back. And like you said, the South African horse as well. Give me another. Going to be easier to pronounce than Izzy Vungu Vungu. But, it's going to be a fun day and a really good race here. And yeah, I agree with you about Sparkle Blue. This is a horse that I also noticed, if you go back and look, yes, this horse won in debut, but this horse has never won off of a layoff outside of that. And so I do wonder if this one, because last year even had a race in before winning this Hillsborough. So I do wonder maybe if this one just needs maybe a race under her belt to kind of get going here. But I always have a soft spot in my heart for Sparkle Blue because I took my mom to the Virginia Oaks one year down at Colonial Downs. And this horse won at 30, or didn't win, but finished second at 31-1. My mom said to me right before the race, she goes, "Why don't you do more place bets?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." And so I decided to put a $20 place bet on Sparkle Blue at 31-1. And my mom was like very thrilled about this. She's like, "We're going out to eat tonight." And I'm like, yes, we are going out to eat tonight.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I
So
love that.
always love Sparkle Blue when I see her show up in the past performances. But yeah, it should be a fun race. So let's head to the Florida Oaks, which is a grade 3 going a mile and a 16th for the 3-year-old fillies. And again, this one, a field of 12, a full field, and a really competitive one. You certainly look at, some of the horses like Nitrogen in particular coming off that Breeders' Cup performance. And what's so interesting is the stablemate of Nitrogen is Vixen, who is also from Mark Casse, and who we saw come back and win the Here Comes the Bride down at Gulfstream Park after winning the Swedish Chant as well. And so it seems like Cassie's got a couple of really nice ones, and that race is actually coming back pretty good in terms of that Breeders' Cup juvenile turf. And so this one's coming off a win in the Ginger Brew, and now keeps Jose Ortiz aboard. Looks pretty tough, but this is, again, a very competitive field. You have some Grand Motion horses. You have some Chad Brown horses with a horse like Opulent Restraint, certainly coming off a win in the Chelsea Flower. So interesting, and kind of your thoughts and which horses maybe you're most interested to see on Saturday in this one.
Yeah, I think you have to take a good long look at Nitrogen. You look at Mark Casse kind of bringing his 3-year-old fillies back turf and dirt because he had such a strong year last year with 2-year-olds, and with what Lacara was able to do at Tampa. Obviously, she did not win next time out at Gulfstream with not maybe the best of trips, but she was very impressive with her first race off the bench. Nitrogen winning the Ginger Brew was actually the first win of her career. And it was painful watching that replay back because Love Surveyor was trained by Christoph, and one that he was very high on going into there. And Nitrogen, just really kind of the class of what she'd been facing as a 2-year-old. She took that jump into a 3-year-old season. So I think that makes it very exciting. We'll see if Opulent Restraint can do that, kind of that jump that we were talking about. I'm excited to see Opulent Restraint because in my notes looking back at her, she was always a really energetic filly as a 2-year-old. So maybe one that could take a jump forward. I thought Pretty Lavish was impressive though. In her last race at Tampa, we weren't on air for that race, but I remember watching it while being there because I was there that day. She could not be pulled up past the wire. Even though she only won by a neck, it wasn't even so much of a gallop out. It was that she wanted to just keep going, and she was spirited coming back to the winner's circle. And I always think those kinds of things are interesting because she was still full of energy even after winning the race in a hard-fought effort.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I very much so agree in terms of it's always interesting when horses, come back like that. I remember there was a Charlie Appleby horse, and you'll remember the name as soon as she was a 3-year-old turf horse last year who won the Belmont Oaks, and now I'm blanking on her name. But anyway, she was very good. And she, but I remember being at Aqueduct when she came back from the track, and she wasn't even breathing hard. Like she just was like, oh, okay. And I was like, this is stunning. Like to see, so some of these horses just, like you said, they just feel very spirited. Like, let's keep going. I feel great today. And let's just keep running. So
I remember that too. And I can't think of her name. I can actually, Cinderella's Dream. I can envision her perfectly. So. Yeah.
Because if I'm not mistaken,
Beautiful Love, but I was like, no, that's not her.
Yes, Cinderella's Dream. Thank you.
Yeah, I remember that.
But I remember she also, if you remember, she, I don't know if you or Maggie are out there, but if anybody's ever been to Aqueduct, the winner's circle up top at Aqueduct is like pretty shallow. And I remember she just came like bulldozing into the winner's circle and like almost like took out the flowers. And it's like everyone's like, whoa. And just, she was just like, oh, okay.
I mean, to be fair, probably Charlie Appleby's team is not really familiar with Aqueduct. They're more familiar, maybe not as much. And the gentleman holding her was kind of like, where do I go?
Yeah. No, it was, I did get a picture of Charlie Appleby talking to William Buick in the paddock at Aqueduct. And I was like, this is a once in a lifetime picture. You're not going to see this very often. These two guys at Aqueduct. So, but listen, this Florida Oaks is nice, and it sets up for a really fun year on the turf for these 3-year-old fillies too. And you mentioned this previously. Some of the races we're going to see up here in New York, whether it's at Aqueduct, whether it's at Saratoga, this is a fun crop that we're going to see continue to develop throughout the year. Speaking of a fun crop that's going to continue to develop, let's obviously go to the headlining race, the Tampa Bay Derby, Kentucky Derby Prep, mile and a 16th for 3-year-olds. Acacia, fingers crossed this is going to be a wagering event this year after what happened last year, which was no fault of anybody at Tampa Bay Downs. And I felt bad for track announcer Jason Beam, who was just taking a lot of flack on. He was just kind of the front man for all of the announcements. But listen, this is an exciting field of – it's only a field of 7, but there's some really talented horses in this race. And obviously starting with Chancer McPatrick, coming off a disappointing effort in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile, which was his first attempt, around 2 turns. But that race in a lot of ways was a merry-go-round with one exception, which we'll talk about in a second. But Chancer is a horse that you and I saw up close in person, obviously this summer. I remember talking to you right after the Champagne, and we both were just dazzled by this horse's natural ability of just the way he gobbled up horses and ground around the turn and just blew by everybody in that race. And he's coming back now. That running style it doesn't leave a lot of room for error sometimes when you're facing top competition, but now he's got the blinkers on, and I'm interested to see whether he's the same sort of late running horse that he always is, because one of the things in the Champagne is he actually broke pretty well, but he just kind of naturally drifted back to the back of the field. So I wonder if these blinkers are maybe keep him a little bit more engaged.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how the blinkers are going to affect him because he's such a deep closer. He's almost what you could call a lazy horse early on in the race. But I don't know if, Chad's not one to put like a big blinker cup. It's probably going to be a little kind of typical cheater on.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going to totally change this type of horse that comes from so far out of it. So I'm really not expecting him to be much more forward. What I wonder if the blinkers will do is that if you look back, especially his races in New York, obviously he had some trouble with the Hopeful getting out of the gate, which we've talked about a lot, and that made it even that much more impressive. But even in the Champagne, he was climbing a little bit early. Yeah. And I wonder if it's the blinkers not necessarily getting out of the gate and getting into the race. I wonder if it's to have him be a little bit quicker in his response time to Flavien. I would imagine it's a conversation that's been had between Chad Brown and between Flavien Prat, that sometimes we always think about blinkers or an equipment change as adding more speed, but it's not necessarily that. And it's also not necessarily for horses, to have a little bit more focus in the stretch. It could be any of those things, but you kind of saw it as well with Owen Almighty, who didn't need any more speed. And yes, he was drifting, but Brian Lynch had said it was to let him be a little bit more receptive to his rider. And I'm wondering if that might be the case with Chancer McPatrick, that maybe Flavien Prat can get him to respond a little bit earlier.
It's going to be interesting to see. And like you, I was very curious about the equipment change because he's just a horse that has just such a devastating move when he starts to just unleash that stride of his. And it'll be interesting to see him come back as a 3-year-old and to see, how much he's continued to develop, how much he's been able to continue to grow and mature. Now, one horse that did gobble up a ton of ground in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile, which was largely a merry-go-round, is a horse that was not in Chad Brown's barn at the time, but has been transferred to him since, and that is Hill Road, who was a horse that had only ever run on the turf, came over to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, was a massive long shot that day at 61-1, and ran 3rd and came from 10th. And so he was kind of one of the only horses to really make up significant ground on that day. Now he's been training with Chad since being transferred to that barn. He also is getting blinkers on. And he's a horse that when you look at his turf races, he was a little bit more prominently placed in those races and a little bit more forward. So I do wonder with him if the blinkers might be something that gets him maybe not sitting last or something like that early, and maybe more of a mid-pack trip at the very least. But he's a huge X factor, I feel like, in this race, because I'm not sure what to expect out of him.
I know. I feel the exact same way. And he did. He was the only one to really make up ground late. You kind of had the big three in the Breeders' Cup, right, between East Avenue, Chancer McPatrick, and Jonathan's Way, and
Yeah.
none of them showed up.
Yeah.
And Citizen Bull was really able to control things. Now, he did back it up with a win coming back
Yeah.
for Bob Baffert. Gaming finished third in his first race back as a 3-year-old. So yes, he was able to back up that performance, but I think tactics were against Chancer McPatrick, and I think you have to
Yeah.
give a little bit more credit to Hill Road because of the fact that he was able to run on late for third in that race. But yeah, I don't really know what to expect from him in here.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And another horse we'll see what we end up getting is, of course, a horse on the far outside, Patch Adams for Brad Cox. This is a horse that was so impressive, breaking his maiden two back at Churchill Downs, going 7 furlongs. Last time out with Flavian aboard, now we get Florent Giroux back up for Cox. And this is a horse that, listen, in that race last time out in the Southwest, I should say, was just taken much further back, kind of had a little bit of an issue at the start and didn't really get into the position. I think draws very well in this race to the outside, has outstanding speed, should be able to stalk the early pace. You would imagine a horse like Owen Almighty is going to be up there on the front end with Irad Ortiz Jr. A horse like Brodeur has good early speed as well, but I'd imagine Patch Adams and Florent Giroux are going to be kind of right off the hip of maybe that lead pair and really make sure this horse is forward. There's nothing in the pedigree to suggest this horse can't be very successful at 2 turns, and particularly if this race being a mile and a 16th shouldn't be an issue. But interested to see if this one can bounce back. And this one's been an odds-on favorite in all 3 career starts. And so the fact that you might actually get this horse at 2-1 as opposed to 3-5, it might actually seem like good value at some point.
Yeah, that very well could be the case. It's interesting enough that the damn well-humored chick, she won the Wayward Lass at Tampa, so it's in his pedigree to like Tampa Bay Downs. But
yeah, that's
I mean,
true.
the Southwest was an interesting race. Obviously, Speed King was able to control things on the front end. Sandman had all of that trouble that we discussed and came on. Sandman kind of strikes me as the type that will always do just enough to keep you interested in his next race, but I don't know. Now, I was at Oakland for the Rebel, and none of those horses out of the Southwest ran particularly well in the Rebel.
That's true.
So I think that's a little bit of a question as well. Patch Adams has had an extra 2 weeks from the Rebel versus some of those other horses that are from the Southwest versus the others that came back in the Rebel. So I do think that could potentially help him. He's also based here at Payson with Brad Cox. Brad won the Sam F. Davis with John Hancock, who he's giving a little bit more time to. Luckily for Brad, he's got a very deep bench, and he's got those coming in here. So while I've actually never been at a race for Patch Adams, I have seen him train, and he is a specimen. So I'm not really concerned about the distance. I think he just needs the trip, and he needs to show that he is the quality. Because I think out of that Southwest, we have not yet really gotten a firm grasp as to whether that's one of the most higher quality prep races yet.
Yeah. No, that's a great point about the Southwest coming back. Yeah, kind of, mediocre in some ways when they ran back in the Rebel, and which, of course, was won very thrillingly by Cole Battle. Big fan of Lonnie Briley here. And so very excited for those connections to be running on the first Saturday in May. But yeah, this is, those big 3 right there. But then, listen, we also got to give a little bit of credit to Owen Almighty, a horse that I think you and I both were a little bit against in that Sam F. Davis. I at least I know I was. I didn't think that horse had much of a chance. I still think this horse is a sprinter long term, but really showed a lot of guts, battling with John Hancock down the stretch the whole way. And with this race also continuing to be at a mile and a 16th, you have Irad Ortiz Jr. continuing to stay on this mount, should be able to control things up front. You know as well as anyone, Tampa Bay can be a very speed-favoring track on big days. And so if a horse is prominently placed like Owen Almighty, you got to give him a shot potentially to at least go gate to wire in this type of a race.
Yeah, I do think that speed was very beneficial on Sam F. Davis Day. And I think that really helped John Hancock, and it probably helped Owen Almighty as well. The race did not come back at all. And that being said, like you said, he was incredibly game. That was his first time with the blinkers on, which I spoke to Irad Ortiz later in the day, and he said, oh, it really helped him. He was so much more responsive, kind of what we were talking about. He was really pleased with the difference that it made. Obviously, after that DQ in the Pasco. That being said, I did see a quote from Brian Lynch that he said he wanted to stay on the Tampa Bay Derby, but they're looking at Pat Day Mile, not Kentucky
Yeah.
Derby, which
That
I
makes sense.
think is awesome. Like I love that trajectory for this horse. I think that'll really, really suit him well. And he's one that I've really grown to have a soft spot for, just watching him, because he fights every time. It's really cool to see. He's a game little horse. Yeah.
I'd love to hear that too, about, targeting the Pat Day Mile. And I know there's a horse that I got to see up here for George Weaver, Colloquial. And that horse looks like he's going to be, targeting those Pat Day Mile, Woody Stevens, H. Allen Jerkins, kind of that. And as much as I do love the Travers, man, I love those 3-year-old sprint races. And I love like the Pat Day Miles, the Woody Stevens. Those are my favorite races all summer. So I can't wait. And, it's always fun to see that crop, because so many times, this, these horses that are on the Derby trail, maybe they don't want a mile and an eighth. They don't want a mile and a quarter. Maybe they are kind of more one-turn horses. And so you see a lot of these horses that we get to know on the Derby trail ultimately cut back later in the summer to 7 furlongs and kind of running these one-turn races. And so it's great for fans, because you have become familiar with these horses. Now they're just running a little bit of a different type of race.
Absolutely. I think the best example of that is a horse like Whitmore, who turned out to be such a great sprinter and was such a big fan favorite. But a lot of people sometimes forget that he actually ran in the Kentucky Derby.
Yes, no, absolutely right. Old man Whitmore. I love that. I love Whitmore.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be a fun day. And Acacia, let the folks know when you're going to be on air and like what the coverage is going to be like tomorrow at Tampa Bay Downs.
Yeah, we're going to be on from 4:30 to 7. So unfortunately, missing the early part of the card, but we do start in race 9. So we have some of the big ones later on the show. It's also covering Aqueduct and Oaklawn. The Azeri at Oaklawn with the return of Torpedo Anna will be a huge storyline for the day as well. So Lafitte Pinkai, Richie Migliori, and Maggie Wolfendale are at Oaklawn. I'll be at Tampa, and then we'll have Greg Wolf and the team holding down the fort in New York. So we've got everything covered for a big day of racing tomorrow.
We really do. And yeah, Greg, God bless him. It's going to feel empty at Aqueduct. It's just like Greg and Andy and Paul, and that's about it. And so we'll get Sarah out there in the paddock and doing all that stuff. But yeah, it should be a great day of racing. You mentioned the return of Torpedo Ann, and then that Azeri. 1 to 5, 1 to 9. It's gonna be a lot of fun to see her run and come back for her 4-year-old campaign. And like you were saying earlier, the jumps from 3 to 4, the jump from 4 to 5. It's great to see these horses come back, even just from 3 to 4, run a little bit more as they get older.
Yeah, I think from a fan perspective, having her back this year, because she won the Breeders' Cup, she won all these grade ones, she's Horse of the Year. You could understand them saying, "Let's go breed her and move on." And as a filly, she doesn't really have anything to lose with coming back, so why not? And I really applaud the Connections for keeping her in training, because that's how fans get to follow her along and follow her career.
Yes.
So you create more fans, you create a good storyline, and I just think it's really good for the sport.
Listen, in our office at NYRA Bets, people are still complaining and arguing between Zenyatta and Rachel. I mean, the reason is, they came back, they ran, they had longer careers than just a 6-race career that sometimes you see out of these, Kentucky Derby Triple Crown type of horses. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to put you on the spot. Does she run against the boys this year, you think?
Yes. Yeah. I hope she runs in the Whitney. I would not be surprised.
That's what I'm thinking.
And I think she absolutely will. And I think it'll be awesome. White Barrio versus Torpedo Anna, or, whoever else has taken steps forward at that time. Let's go. Yeah.
I hear you. No, I think she took so well to Saratoga. She ran so well in Travers that you figure Kenny's going to, and, Kenny likes to put on a show too. So I'd imagine that, and we love it. And so it is, and you're right. Sierra Leone coming back, Fierceness coming back. It's a rematch. You get White Barrio, you get Locked. I mean, that could be a really fun race. So, all right. I'm already ready for Saratoga, and we haven't even gotten, done with the Aqueduct winter meet. So, all right. Acacia, thank you again so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. Best of luck tomorrow down at Tampa Bay. And good luck to Pippin too, wherever
Thank you. He jumped off. He got bored, but he had to make some snow.
Well, I'm glad Pippin made an appearance as per usual. So, listen, thank you again, everybody, for tuning in and watching this episode of Snowbirds. Make sure to press that like and subscribe button today. For Acacia Clement, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a wonderful day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.